Chapter 14. Deterioration. Her door swung open with a loud thud, jolting her out of fitful sleep. The room was too dark to properly make out the men, there being no window in her room, and she was sure night had fallen. The corridor outside was dimly lit. The surprise had set her nerves on edge, and her heart pumping so hard she could hear it in her ears. Up, up, up! One of the men grabbed her by the arm, yanking her from the bed. She found her tongue. Get off me! She tried pulling her arm away, but ended up both arms restrained. I want a phone call. Let me call my parents. Shut your mouth. The man who ordered this shoved her in the back. She would have gone over were it not for her restrained arms. Take off your masks, cowards. Let me see your faces. She spat at one of them. They did not reply. They continued to half push, half drag her along the corridor. Someone was fighting, coming out of the room next to hers. Peter? She called out to him. She was rewarded by a hand pushing her head so far down that she was bent almost double. She could see her knees. Don, a muffled reply from the boy, who it was clear was faring no better. Where are you taking us? Where are you taking us? She could barely walk in the position they were holding her. Searing pain ran through her back. Get in there, one of the men growled as both she and Peter were thrown to the floor in the room. That boy hasn't eaten anything. Get him to eat. That was the final order before the men disappeared again, Keys locking the door. At least there was a small amount of natural light coming into this room, supplied by a tiny skylight. Scudding clouds rippled over a half moon. Are you okay? Peter asked. She held out a hand to him, and he squeezed it. Her attention was already focused on a small boy, hugging his knees, rocking himself backwards and forwards. He appeared not to notice them. Donna felt great sadness at seeing the young boy in such a state. He reminded her of her brother. She sat next to him, placing an arm around his shoulder, not too tight. She chose not to say anything, but rocked backward and forward to match his rhythm. At first the boy paid her no heed, but after a while he leaned his head on her shoulder, and the rocking slowed. Donna held her hand out to Peter, who sat on the edge of the bed next to them. She wanted him to know she had not forgotten him. He rubbed her shoulder. The younger boy let out a tiny sob, and Donna pulled back enough to look at his face. She placed a hand either side of his head. Honey, we're here, she said in a half-whisper. See? We're here. Mom? He asked, though she was not sure if he was speaking to her. No, honey. I'm sorry, I'm not your mom. She brushed the hair back from his eyes. I'm Donna. What's your name? He continued, looking straight ahead as though dazed. Is your name Brian? She prompted. He shook his head. Kevin? He shook his head more vigorously this time. Iggle Piggle. It was the only CBeebies character she could remember. No, silly. She thought she caught a tiny smile just before his face became guarded once more. She placed the palm of her hand on the boy's forehead. It felt hot. She was sure he was running a temperature. She said so to Peter. I found some water. Peter handed her a plastic bottle approximately half full. She twisted off the cap and sniffed it before placing it to the boy's lips. He took a sip, and she let out a breath she'd been holding. It's Kyle, the boy said, in a voice she could barely hear. Kyle, Donna repeated. She looked round at Peter. His name is Kyle. Hello, Kyle. Peter reached out to touch Kyle's arm. I'm Peter, and I'm very pleased to meet you. His voice shook, and Donna realised he was shivering. He was bare-chested. She took off a full-sleeved cotton blouse she was wearing over a T-shirt and put it around Peter's shoulders. Thank you, he whispered, and he put his arms into the sleeves. Donna continued to cuddle Kyle. She gave him a sip of water. Will you eat for us, Kyle? He shook his head. A paper plate lay next to the bed on which were sandwiches which had not yet gone dry. Donna broke off a small piece and held it to Kyle's lips. He turned his head away. He's not going to want to eat if he's got a temperature. Peter ran a hand through his close-cropped hair and strode over to the door, giving it a resounding kick. Donna felt Kyle jump in her arms. Peter, she whispered. Sorry. Peter came back to the bed. Who are these nutcases? What do they want? We've got to get him out of here. His voice still shook a little. Come sit with us, she said, her voice soft. She held out an arm. He paused, as though torn between wanting to tear the room apart and wanting the human closeness. He chose the latter, holding the other two tightly. They sat like that for an age, until they felt the pull of sleep. A well-deserved glass of Chardonnay in hand, Yvonne switched on the evening news. Her wood burner threw dancing shadows around the room. She stood with her back to it, soaking up the warmth. As expected, the headlines were dominated by the burgeoning story of Vortex and their diabolical demands. It seemed that every commentator in the country wanted to have their say. And they were being joined by commentators from a good many other countries. It was hard separating fact from noise, or even downright propaganda. The bulletin switched to a newsreel of the Prime Minister meeting families of the hostages. The DI could see, even in the brevity of the images, the darkness below the Premier's eyes. Her hunched shoulders betrayed the magnitude of the burden for which she was ultimately responsible. The shot changed to one of her at a podium outside of 10 Downing Street. Her gaze resolute, she ordered her countrymen and women not to fulfil the Vortex demands for Bitcoin. Just as with terrorists, she stated, to pay them would be to encourage the taking of more hostages. Back in the studio, they stated that some Bitcoin mining companies believed that many ordinary people had already begun paying some of the Bitcoin ransom. They thought they detected a surge in transactions. I can't say I blame them, Yvonne said out loud. These are children. Who wouldn't want to help save them? The kidnappers knew exactly what they were doing, going after such a soft target. Unexpectedly, their abductors had allowed Donna and Peter to stay in the room with Kyle all night. Donna woke and held her breath as she extracted herself from the 2 sleeping boys. For the first time since her abduction, she was not feeling the cold. She sat bolt upright in semi-darkness, blinking, in an attempt to bring the room into sharper focus. Dawn was breaking outside. She turned to look at the boys. Kyle was sleeping with his head on Peter's chest. Peter's breathing gently stirred strands of the younger boy's hair. The nerve-jangling sound of keys against the lock on a small tray was pushed in along the floor. The door closed again. "Wait!" Donna whispered, afraid to wake her sleeping companions. The bringer of the food paid no heed. Lightly stepping from the bed, she examined the tray, 2 packs of sandwiches to share between 3 of them, and a 2-litre bottle of water. The water was welcome, and she poured a tiny amount onto her head before taking several mouthfuls. She resisted the food. That would have to wait until her friends woke up. They would all eat together. Perhaps Kyle would eat more if he was sharing it with them. But if he didn't, she was sure he would need a doctor. He had felt frail in her arms, like someone only barely present. His ribs stuck out like the rungs of the old Victorian radiator that stood in their room, the one that was not working. She was sure his parents would be devastated if they saw him like this. Peter stirred. She watched him jerk out of his relaxed slumber, sitting bolt upright as he remembered their captive state. A frown darkened his handsome features. "We've got to get out of here." The words hissed like escaping gas from between his teeth. Donna leaned forward to place a comforting hand on his arm. "Careful," she whispered, her gaze tender. "You will wake Kyle." He flicked a glance at the younger boy, extracting his leg from where it had been partially trapped beneath him. "I can't stand it any more." He shook his head, placing a hand on each ear and looking up at the skylight. Donna bit her lip, feeling the need to distract him and ease his angst. "Where are you from, Peter? Where were you taken from?" Peter took his hands down from his ears, regarding her silently for a few moments. Water shimmered in his eyes, but no tears fell. "Machynlleth. I ran away from home. I was sick of living with Mum and Dad and hanging out with my mates. I wanted adventure. I was mad for it. They grabbed me from the park." He flicked his head in the direction of the door and rubbed his forehead. "My mum will be crying her eyes out." "You miss her?" Donna asked, walking over to check on Kyle as he slept. Peter hung his head, his shoulders hunched. "Yeah, I miss her. I really messed up." Donna came back to put her hands on his shoulders. "You were great with Kyle last night. Don't be too hard on yourself." "What about you?" he asked, giving her no more time on him. "Where are you from?" She sat next to him, leaning back on her hands. "Hereford. I'd run away from home too. Been living in Wales in a place called Llanidloes. I was on my way back there when they grabbed me." "Are we all runaways here?" He turned to look at her directly. "Is that what this is? Do you think they know?" Donna shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe." Her eyes narrowed. "But how could they? How could they know?" He shook his head. "You put anything on Facebook?" "A little. What about you?" "Yeah, but my profile and posts are friends only. Anyway, I'm pretty sure Kyle isn't a runaway." "What are they after?" I don't know. But I do know. We need to get out of here.